Hi, this is Arun Peti, your ethics teacher from Pathways Academy. Welcome to the Ethics Capsule series. This is my alter ego, Jalal the ethicist. I have named him after Jalaluddin Rumi. Today we are going to discuss the concept conflict of interest. Some time back, somebody said the president can't have conflict of interest. Says who? So it was Donald Trump. But as per the think tank based out of Washington, until his completion of time in office, he has committed 3,737 conflict of interests. Jokes apart, this is a very important concept. Conflict of interest has been asked by UPSC multiple years. As you could see, 2017, 2018, and 2022. I'll be going through these questions in detail later. We will go for the concept, what it is. We will try to understand it. There are two ways you could understand it. One thing is conflict of interest when there is a conflict between your interests and somebody else's interest. The somebody can be a person or an entity, an organization. So when there is a conflict of interest, like I do something which is useful for me at the cost of somebody else. Particularly, I hold a relationship of loyalty to the other person. I owe a duty to the other person or the organization. In that case, helping myself would lead to a situation of conflict of interest. For example, here, a traffic police personnel getting bribe, allowing the person to go scot-free. The government loses money and also he fails to discipline the motorist. Another way of looking at conflict of interest is a case of ethical dilemma, where you play a single role and you have multiple relationships and there are different expectations from different entities or different individuals, and each are in conflict with each other. For example, personal interest, the official duty, and also the public interest. So these could not go well with each other. One may take priority over the other. For example, in the case of movie industry, a creative artist wants to tell the story in a particular way, so he has to answer his conscience. But at the same time, his movie is being produced, sponsored by people who would like it to be done in a particular way. So this conflict would be there. He would also have the best interest of the audience in mind. So all these things need not be in the same line. So this is another way of looking at conflict of interest. Why we should take this very seriously is conflict of interest is part of life. It's always there. And particularly when it comes to governance, you just cannot avoid it. It's all around you. To create trust among public in government organizations, to create social capital, it's very, very important to resolve conflict of interest. Ethical governance or good governance refers to even predicting where conflict of interest can come. So you need to frame rules accordingly. You need to really identify the conflict of interest, make it transparent, and also try to resolve it. At last, what matters is public interest over personal interest. Let me make it very clear, conflict of interest by itself is not a crime. It just sets you up for a possible crime. So we need to clearly differentiate between conflict of interest and actual crime happening because of conflict of interest. What can we do about conflict of interest? One thing is you better avoid situations where there is conflict of interest. For example, many of your students might be taking classes in coaching institutes. If you're taking classes in two coaching institutes which are competitors to each other, definitely there is a conflict of interest. You could just avoid such a situation. Otherwise, you could be very transparent and open about it. That itself builds trust. But the problem when it comes to government service, it's just not enough to be transparent, because people cannot keep tracking whether you are misusing this conflict of interest. So it's better you do any of these two things, like abstaining from making decisions. I remember one actual case in a Forest Service interview conducted by UPSC. In the actual interview, a board member happened to be the project guide of the candidate, the aspirant. So he knows the candidate very well. So this information was disclosed to the chairperson by the board member, and the board member told, I am not taking part in this exercise of asking questions and passing on my judgment on this candidate. And the chairperson agreed to it. So that's a way of, you pulling yourself out of a decision-making situation. That's another way of doing it. The last and the best would be resolving the conflict of interest once for all. For example, as in the case the first example I told you, like when you're working in, happen to work in two institutes, it's better not to resign from one of the institutes or not to work for the other institute, so that this conflict of interest is completely resolved. Now, let's go to the questions. 2017, this was the question. In public sector, conflict of interest arises when official duties, public interest and personal interest are taking priority over one another. How can this conflict be resolved? Describe it with example. So, even if the question doesn't explicitly ask you to give an example, it's wise to provide an example. That's my suggestion. So here you could see that there are three things. Official duties is there, public interest is there, and personal interest is there. I remember an actual case in which the collector of a district happened to, be in this situation where the official duty and the public interest was obviously in conflict. There was a case where few children got into the water tank, the public water tank, and they were playing for some time, but the ladder which would help them to come out broke off. So the kids drowned, they fell, nobody could hear their help. It was a very tall public water tank. After this death, technically, the government was not in a position, according to the official rules, to give any compensation because it was an accident probably an accident caused by the children themselves. But the district collector took little bit liberty and gave compensation under the natural disaster, probably quoting, weather phenomena which led to the collapse of the ladder and death of the children. So you cannot bring back the lives of the children, but the best you could do is some kind of compensation. And in that case, the public interest was put on the pedestal, and a little bit of the conflict situation was resolved. Of course, obviously, personal interest cannot take precedence. We just cannot benefit on our own at the expense of the public exchequer or things like that. That's obvious. So this is an example that I just thought of, but you could come up with your own examples. Moving on to the next question. I will just read it out for you. What is meant by conflict of interest? Illustrate with examples the difference between actual and potential conflict of interest. As I told you earlier, sometimes there need not be any conflict of interest. It's just a illusion of or a possible conflict of interest. For example, in the present Maham Maitra MP case, of course, it's sub judice now. Let the court take the final call, but it could be either potential conflict of interest or actual conflict of interest, because there is a corporate conflict of interest if the questions have been asked on behalf of a rival corporate group and the questions are criticizing another corporate group. There is a potential conflict of interest, but you need to really establish that somebody has really materially benefited and the intentions were mala fide. So I think that could be cited as an example where it could be either actual or potential. But again, any example you could be using for that. This is the latest one, I believe. Write short notes on the following in 30 words. So what is conflict of interest? It's a very small question, so I think I don't need to explain it again. So this is how the questions can come up on this particular topic. It's a very, very important topic. So that's it from me. Thank you. Hope it was useful. You can follow my Telegram channel, Jalal the Ethicist, for constant updates on GS Paper 4. Thank you.